The walls of Balmoral Castle had heard royal secrets before, but nothing like this. In early 2025, Prince William stunned his father, King Charles III, by refusing the crown, calling kingship a prison sentence. Moments later, behind closed doors, the king broke down in tears. Witnesses say it was grief, regret, and fear for the monarchy's future all at once. A lifetime of preparation shattered in seconds, and the crown's next chapter thrown into chaos. William's unexpected refusal shatters expectations. It happened in the stillness of Balmoral Castle in early 2025. The family had gathered in the grand drawing room, a place where countless royal conversations had unfolded over the years. But this one was different. Prince William, heir to the throne for over 4 decades, stood and told his father, King Charles III, that he could not and would not take the crown. His voice was steady, but his words landed like thunder. He called kingship a prison sentence, echoing the warnings his mother, Princess Diana, had once made about the suffocating nature of royal life. William's reasons struck at the heart of his family. He spoke openly about Catherine's recent health battle, or grueling recovery from cancer in 2024, and the toll public life had taken on their children George, Charlotte, and Louis. He said that stepping into the role of monarch now would rob his family of the peace they had fought to protect. In a room filled with portraits of kings and queens past, William broke with 1,000 years of tradition in a single conversation. It was not a rebellion in the sense of Edward VIII's 1936 abdication. William framed it instead as a choice for peace over power. He explained that he had carried the expectation of the crown since childhood, and had fulfilled every duty asked of him: tours, state events, military service, but that the personal cost had grown too high. His words were less a rejection of the monarchy itself than a declaration that the role as it currently existed was unsustainable for him. The silence that followed was heavy. Senior courtiers present described it as a rupture in time, the moment they realized the line of succession had been broken in spirit, if not yet in law or Charles. The blow was personal and political. His reign, which had begun with such care in September 2022, was now shadowed by uncertainty. William's choice set the stage for the emotional unraveling that would soon spread through the palace. News of William's refusal rippled through the royal household with the quiet force of an earthquake. Conversations stopped mid-sentence, staff exchanged worried glances, and behind closed doors phones buzzed with whispered updates. But the deepest reaction came from one man, the king himself. Already weakened by illness, Charles III felt the weight of his son's decision in every part of his being. What followed next would not just mark his reign. It would mark one of the most vulnerable moments in modern royal history. Charles is reduced to tears. When the door closed after that meeting and Balmoral, King Charles III sat in his armchair, his hands trembling slightly. Witnesses say he removed his glasses and pressed them to his forehead before lowering his head. Then, to the astonishment of those nearby, the king began to cry. It was not the quiet, composed grief of a public figure, but the raw emotion of a father whose son had just turned away from the destiny laid before him since birth. For Charles, the shock was layered. He thought of his own weight for the throne. Over 70 years as heir apparent, watching his mother, Queen Elizabeth II, fulfill the role until her passing in 2022. To have finally worn the crown only to see his eldest son refuse it felt like history repeating in a cruel and unexpected way. The king was devastated. A senior insider told The Times it echoed his own long wait, but this time with no resolution. His tears carried more than sadness. They were heavy with regret for the pressures he himself had placed on William, for the unrelenting demands of public life. and for the sacrifices that had strained their family. There was fear that the monarchy might stumble into a succession crisis just as it faced increasing scrutiny in the 21st century. And above all, there was the fragile awareness that his legacy, still in its infancy, was already slipping from his grasp. That night Charles reportedly spoke little. Courtiers say he spent hours pacing his study, glancing at the portrait of himself with William taken just after the coronation. To him it was now a picture of a future that might never be. This was not just his darkest hour as king, it was a turning point for the monarchy itself. The crown's path forward had been thrown into question, and the answers were nowhere in sight. While Charles grieved in private, the palace halls carried another kind of sound, one that would soon fuel public outrage. In Clarence House, Queen Camilla was hosting a small luncheon when word of William's decision reached her table. Those present say her reaction was startlingly different from the king's. Instead of shock or sadness, Camilla laughed, a quiet, deliberate laugh that seemed to hold meaning. For some it was harmless, for others it was the first sign of a deeper game being played. Camilla's grim laughter echoes through the palace. It began as a faint chuckle, according to a staff member in the room, but the expression on Queen Camilla's face was unmistakable. Just hours after William's confession at Balmoral, she sat at a polished oak table in Clarence House, a glass of wine in hand, and said he never wanted it anyway. The comment, described by one witness as dripping with sarcasm, was followed by a laugh that many interpreted as more than simple amusement. Or Camilla, the timing of William's refusal could not have been more significant. Palace insiders have long whispered about her unease with her. His reformist plans, his intention to slim down the monarchy, reduce ceremonial excess, and shift the spotlight firmly on to Catherine. In William's absence, those plans would stall. To her loyal aides, this was not just a setback for her stepson, it was an opening for her to maintain influence behind the scenes. Staff who overheard the exchange described her laughter as cold and calculated. It was not the spontaneous mirth of surprise, but the measured response of someone who understood the shifting power dynamics at play, with Charles III vulnerable and William stepping back, Camilla his position as the key thing's closest advisor, and perhaps his emotional anchor, grew stronger in a family defined by hierarchy. Proximity to the monarch is everything, and she knew it outside the palace walls. News of her reaction would later leak, painting a sharp contrast to Charles' tears. In the court of public opinion, her laughter became the ironic counterpoint to the king's grief, two responses to the same crisis, each telling a different story. For her critics, it was proof of opportunism in the midst of turmoil. For her defenders, it was resilience. Either way, it was a sound the monarchy would not soon forget: constitutional chaos. The moment Prince William declared he would not take the throne, Britain was thrust into a constitutional storm. Under UK law, an heir cannot simply refuse the crown. They must first ascend, then formally abdicate, the same procedure that caused the Edward VIII crisis in 1936. William's refusal broke centuries of precedent, leaving the monarchy suspended between two tradition and reality. In the absence of a clear successor willing to serve, the very foundation of the royal succession was suddenly in question. Within hours, Parliament was forced into emergency consultations. Senior officials met with constitutional scholars and Kensington Palace representatives to explore one proposal suggested allowing the crown to pass directly to Prince George, who at just 12 years old was far too young to reign. This would trigger the need for a regency, a caretaker monarch to serve until George reached 18. The suggestion sparked fierce debate over who should fill that role. Skipping William entirely was legally possible, but politically volatile. Such a move would require a member. And to the Regency Act 1937, and unanimous consent from all 15 Commonwealth realms, a process that could take months. Some MPs feared that prolonging the uncertainty would erode public faith in the monarchy even further. Others argued the crisis was an opportunity to reform the institution in ways long overdue. All the while, King Charles III watched his carefully imagined succession plan dissolve, with William unwilling, George unready, and the nation anxious. The monarchy faced its most severe legal crisis in almost a century. The eyes of the world were now fixed on Britain, not for its royal pageantry, but for its unfolding royal uncertainty. As politicians wrestled with centuries-old laws, the personal toll of the crisis was deepening inside the palace. The question of who would inherit the throne wasn't just a matter for Parliament, it was a reality the Wales family had to face at home. For Catherine, the weight of it all became impossible to ignore. William had stepped back, but the demands on their household had only grown. In the midst of political chaos, she began quietly stepping forward as the family's anchor. Catherine steps in. While the headline screamed of crisis, Catherine, Princess of Wales, moved with deliberate calm. In public, she attended charity events, hospital visits, and school openings. As if nothing had changed behind the scenes, she was holding the Wales household together. Friends say her experience with illness in 2024, the exhausting months of cancer treatment and recovery, had steeled her resolve. Where others saw turmoil, she saw the need for stability, especially for their children George, Charlotte, and Louise. Catherine made a conscious effort to shield children from the media frenzy. George's growing role in the line of succession was a reality she couldn't erase, but she could protect him from the noise surrounding it. Charlotte's calm presence was a help, while his innocent questions, "Why doesn't Daddy want to be king?" were met with gentle reassurances. Her parenting, balancing royal duty with maternal care, was becoming a quiet masterclass in resilience. Royal watchers began to notice her steady presence polling, and early 2025 showed her favorability climbing sharply, with some surveys placing her above William. Commentators credited her grace under pressure as the reason the monarchy's public approval hadn't fallen even further during the crisis. In an institution where image is as important as policy, Catherine had become its most dependable representative. Even within the palace, her influence was growing. Senior aides shot her counsel on public messaging, and some MPs quietly floated her name as a possible regent if George's ended early. Without ever publicly addressing the succession crisis, Catherine had positioned herself as the figure capable of guiding the monarchy through it, a role she seemed ready to fill. While Catherine strengthened her position, the true impact of the crisis was felt most sharply by the youngest members of the royal family. George's days began filling with new lessons on history, protocol, and public speaking. Charlotte quietly adapted to the growing demands around her, and Louis, the youngest, sensed enough to know something had changed. The world saw them as symbols of continuity, but behind closed doors their childhoods were being reshaped by a crisis they never chose. George, Charlotte, and Louis. For Prince George, the crisis meant a sudden acceleration of preparation for kingship. At just 12 years old, his schedule shifted from a balance of school and sports to intensive tutoring and constitutional law, history, and statecraft. His weekends now income looted briefings from palace officials, a responsibility that even his father William hadn't faced. So young friends of the family worried the weight was too much too soon for a boy still finding his place in the world. Princess Charlotte, at 10 years old, took on her role with quiet maturity. Those close to the family say she has an instinct for composure, mirroring the steadiness of her great-aunt Princess Anne. While her role would be supportive rather than sovereign, she understood the importance of public image. Charlotte began accompanying Catherine to more events, learning through observation how to navigate the balance between royal formality and genuine human connection. For Prince Louis, the youngest, just 7 years old, the changes were less structured but still profound. The absence of his father from key discussions and the increased seriousness in the household were enough for him to sense that life had shifted. His once carefree public appearances became rarer, and when they did occur, observers noted a quieter demeanor. Even without the full picture, Louis was absorbing the pressures that come with a royal title. Together, the three children became unwilling symbols of the monarchy's uncertain future. Photographs of them, George looking solemn, Charlotte composed, Louis holding tightly to his mother's hand, began to dominate coverage of the crisis. For many Britons, the images were bittersweet, a reminder of both the crown's enduring line and the personal cost carried by those born into it. Palace factions form. Inside the royal household, the fallout from William's decisions split loyalties almost overnight. Senior courtiers, private secretaries, and longtime aides began quietly aligning with different camps. Those loyal to King Charles III and Queen Camilla pushed for continuity, even if it meant bypassing William and tightening Charles' inner circle. Traditionalists, many of whom had served since Queen Elizabeth II's reign, viewed William's step back as a breach of duty, one that risked undermining the monarchy's centuries-old stability. On the other side were reform-minded staff and younger aides, many drawn from Kensington Palace. They saw in Catherine the potential for a monarchy that was leaner, more modern, and better attuned to public sentiment. A rising approval ratings in early 2025 gave this group confidence. Quiet conversations about her as a future regent, or even the monarchy's primary public face, began to circulate in the corridors of both Buckingham and Clarence House. Camilla's faction worked swiftly to consolidate influence. She attended more private audiences with Charles, sat in on high-level meetings, and according to one source made herself indispensable. To her supporters this was loyalty. To her critics it was a calculated bid to fill the power vacuum left by William's absence. Her alignment with Charles gave her unmatched access, and in palace politics access was power. The atmosphere inside the palace grew tense. Routine planning meetings took on the air of strategic war councils. Small gestures, who was invited to which lunch, who was copied on which memo, became read as political signal. The monarchy had become a battleground. Her visions, with Catherine's quiet strength on one side, Camilla's entrenched influence on the other, and Charles caught in the middle. While palace corridors buzzed with shifting loyalties, the outside world was forming its own verdict. The royal family's internal divisions were no longer just whispers, they were headlines. Social media, tabloids, and serious broadsheets alike framed the crisis as a turning point for the crown. Public reaction would determine whether the monarchy emerged from this turmoil with renewed legitimacy or deeper fractures. And in the age of instant opinion, it wouldn't take years for that judgment to be made. It was happening in real time. Public shockwaves. The public response was swift and polarizing. On X, hashtags like #monarchy and crisis and William walks away began trending within hours of the news breaking. TikTok videos dissecting William's decision racked up millions of views, some for "there's an act of courage," others as a dereliction of duty to the nation. Within a week, opinion polls showed support for the monarchy dropping from 70% to around 60%, the sharpest decline since 1997 in the days following Princess Diana's death. Op-eds and major newspapers debated whether the monarchy could survive without its expected heir. The Times of London warned of a vacuum at the heart of the crown, while The Guardian argued the crisis was a chance to reinvent the institution. On television, royal commentators split into two camps: those who urged to return to tradition under Charles and Camilla, and those who saw Catherine as the monarchy's best hope for renewal. Street-level sentiment mirrored the media divide in London. Protesters gathered outside Buckingham Palace, carrying signs reading "Reform Now" and "Catherine for Regent" in rural areas, especially in Scotland and Wales. Small gatherings expressed loyalty to Charles and dismay at William's choice. The monarchy, long seen as a unifying symbol, was suddenly becoming a political question, and political questions rarely unite. Within the palace, aides monitored the public mood obsessively. They knew that regaining even a portion of last support would require a clear, compelling vision for the future. Without it, the legitimacy of the institution, already fragile in the 21st century, would be at risk of crumbling faster than anyone imagined. As Britain debated the monarchy's survival, attention turned abroad. The Crown's influence reaches far beyond the UK's borders, and in the Commonwealth the crisis was being watched closely. In Canada, Australia, and the Caribbean, Republican movements sensed opportunity. Meanwhile, diplomats worked quietly to reassure foreign governments that Britain's constitutional framework remained intact. Yet privately, even the most experienced envoys admitted the truth: if the monarchy faltered at home, its position abroad would be far harder to defend. International ripples. In Ottawa, Canadian officials convened closed-door meetings to discuss the implications of William's refusal. Public opinion polls in early 2025 already showed declining enthusiasm for the monarchy, and the crisis only accelerated Republican sentiment. In Australia, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese fielded renewed calls for a referendum on the monarchy's future. The timing was sensitive, just months before the annual Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, where unity would be under intense scrutiny. In the Caribbean, leaders in Jamaica and Barbados spoke more openly about transitioning to full republic status, the symbolism of a fractured British royal family, a king in poor health, an heir stepping back, and competing factions vying for influence fueled arguments for breaking from the Crown. For nations that had already questioned the monarchy's relevance, the crisis was a powerful example. Diplomats based in London reported growing unease among foreign counterparts. Questions about succession and stability overshadowed discussions on trade and security in private. Some suggested that Catherine's rising popularity could be used to project stability internationally, but acknowledged that such a move would be unprecedented in modern royal history. The question remained: could Britain present a united front when its own monarchy was so visibly divided? In the United States, media coverage was intense. Networks from CNN to Fox News highlighted Catherine's approval ratings, surpassing William's, framing her as the figure most capable of uniting both the royal family and public opinion. Yet American fascination with the royal drama came with a sting. Constant comparisons to Diana's turbulent years, reinforcing the narrative that history might be repeating itself. With domestic approval slipping and the Commonwealth's patience thinning, the monarchy approached a decisive moment. Charles's test